Thank you for being here. Good afternoon to every one of you. And I get the privilege of presenting it's a summary report of 2 years, 2 amazing years in Nigeria. As I speak, I will move through the slides. I just wanted to give some visuals to the experience. So on a hot Tuesday afternoon in August 2017, I visited an impoverished community on the outskirts of Abuja, which is Nigeria's capital city, called Waru. Less than an hour away from the city center, Waru lacks basic social services such as schools, markets, health centers, electricity, and proper waste disposal systems. I went to Waru to meet a woman whose daughter had been out of school for a couple of years. Her daughter's name is Titi. A slender and wide-eyed 12-year-old, Titi is the first child in a family of 4 children. Her father works as a car mechanic and her mother as a domestic help in a nearby town. Titi had been staying home since she concluded her primary education in 2015 because her mother could not afford to pay for her primary school education. Well, for her primary school certificate. She had finished primary school. The mother could not pay for the certificate, which would enable her to enroll into secondary school. The cost for this certificate was 10,000 naira, which is the equivalent of $28, which was her mother's monthly income as a domestic help. Titi's mother was the caretaker of the family, as I found out, and she bore most of the financial burden because her husband was rarely at home, apparently in search of an odd job somewhere in town. Titi's mother dropped out of school, secondary school, to get married to Titi's father. And she explained to me that though she desired for Titi to go to school, she had to use the little money she earns to feed the family. Therefore, Titi stayed at home and took care of her younger siblings. Titi's younger sister and brother were also out of school because their parents owed 13,500 naira, which is $38, to their nursery school for the younger ones. Titi shyly came over to me as I proceeded to depart on that day, and she said, "I want to go to school because I want to be a lawyer." Titi is one of the 5 million plus girls who is out of school despite her desire to learn in a country that's considered to be Africa's largest economy. I was disturbed to learn in 2015 that Nigeria had and still has the highest number of children who are out of school. Over half of these children, 69% to be precise, live in the northern part of the country, and most of them are girls. I also learned that child marriage is an issue in Nigeria, with 44% of Nigerian girls married off before their 18th birthday. This awareness and the desire to learn more about the lives of girls prompted my decision to apply for the ICWA Fellowship, or ICWA Fellowship, in March 2016. So what exactly does it mean to empower a girl? Many of us throw it around now, girl child empowerment, empowerment, empowerment. So what exactly does it mean? There's a professor of gender and international development called Naila Kabir, and she defines empowerment as an increase, and I quote, an increase in the ability to make strategic life choices in a context where this ability was previously denied. Hence, in order to empower a girl, the girl must have access to resources. She must also have the ability to define her goals and to act upon them to the maximum potential. Girls in Nigeria are plagued with various issues, most notably harmful cultural practices such as female genital mutilation and sexual gender-based violence, which deny girls their basic human rights. Girls also lack skills to thrive in the 21st century, skills such as science, technology, engineering, arts, and math skills. For girls who have the opportunity to attend school, the poor quality of education, characterized by overfilled classrooms, lack of electricity, unqualified teachers, and poor academic outcomes, make education less inspiring. Sadly, patriarchy continues to marginalize and harm girls. As a young leader in Nigeria said to me, men are the determining factor for the bulk of the issues that happen to girls. Everything boils down to what a man thinks and what a man wants. People don't mind putting their girls in harm's way because of a man. Insecurity also poses challenges for girls' education in Nigeria. The Islamist militant group Boko Haram continues to be a menace in northern Nigeria, making schools unsafe for girls. My ICWA fellowship made me more aware of the complexities of this crisis, and the way to achieve this is by investing in quality education for all girls because she matters. Thank you very much.
With regards to, say, FGM or other, practices that that certainly Western societies, believe are human rights violations, but also just kind of, I think, thinking about how it is that culture and tradition have been inserted into those conversations from both sides, really. So obviously, gender violence is not unique to Africa, and is largely universal, but it certainly varies highly based on its own local manifestations, and that has a lot to do with issues like how gender is defined in various societies, patterns of kinship, patterns of marriage, availability of divorce. Conceptions of male authority, conceptions of female submission, and then in addition, other issues, environmental and social factors such as poverty and marginalization and other factors. So, and then, of course, certainly in the African context, a lot of the gender-based violence that we see in the contemporary context, or has been exacerbated in the contemporary context by political and economic tensions. You see this especially with regards to hotspots on the African continent where you're seeing civil war or very protracted conflicts and instability, political instability. So, does culture and tradition exacerbate gender violence, or could it play a role in terms of quelling it? Of course, certainly in the African context, a lot of the gender-based violence that we see in the contemporary context, or has been exacerbated in the contemporary context by political and economic tensions. You see this especially with regards to hotspots on the African continent where you're seeing civil war or very protracted conflicts and instability, political instability. We need to address gender-based violence in its social and cultural context because it happens in a particular social and cultural context.
We are recognizing and celebrating in a way the 16 days of activism at the moment. And many of you may have seen an oft-repeated statistic that 35% of women worldwide have experienced some kind of physical or sexual violence in their lifetime, and that does not include sexual harassment in the workplace. When you include sexual harassment, that number increases dramatically.
In regards to sexual gender-based violence and even child marriage, incorporating these things into like arts programs, like you schedule, like in a remote community, hosting an art program for girls where they are learning how to paint, but within, like in between the sessions, you have like 30-minute to 1 hour sessions where you talk about child marriage, where you talk about what is abuse, and then even getting them to paint pictures, portraits of how do they experience abuse in the school, in their communities.
The focus over the last several years has been so heavily on adolescent girls, almost to the exclusion, very vocal exclusion of boys. And even though, yes, the prevalence rate of HIV among boys and men is not as high, it doesn't mean that they don't have a role to play. They have a very big role to play. So I'm a huge advocate of engaging men and boys, not only because we want them to be supporters and advocates on behalf of girls and women, but because we see that the norms, the social and gender norms can be very negative for men and boys as well, and they can impede men and boys from seeking care. In many countries, men don't go to the health facility for care for HIV until it's almost too late, until they're almost dying or dead. And that's because of the norm of, it's not masculine to go to the health facility.
We can't exclude men in this conversation. And again, when we're talking about these sugar daddies and whatnot, there's no discussion or conversation about whether, how we address the older men who were, you know, engaged in these practices as well.
I'm a huge advocate of engaging men and boys, not only because we want them to be supporters and advocates on behalf of girls and women, but because we see that the norms, the social and gender norms, can be very negative for men and boys as well. Women are holders of social norms as well. They can actually reinforce unequal gender norms in many cases. I mean, I think the case of female genital cutting is an excellent example, that in addition to the traditional and community leaders being the important gateways to addressing this issue, we also have to talk to the women, to the mothers, to the grandmothers, because they're the ones who are reinforcing the practices because they feel like, well, I've done it, you know, I want my daughters to do it for whatever reasons that they have.